If you're the kind of person who falls apart when someone suddenly goes quiet, this is for you. If you don't fix how you respond to silent treatment, you'll keep losing whole nights to overthinking and chasing texts. Today I'll give you one rule and one line that changes how you respond in that moment. We'll use them in a real Friday night situation where you're staring at your phone, about to send that long emotional paragraph. If that sounds like something you need, stay with me. You're standing in the kitchen with your phone face down on the counter, telling yourself you won't check it again. But you do. And all you see is the same thing you saw an hour ago, nothing. No response. No explanation. Just silence that starts to feel like a judgment on your worth. The room is quiet, but inside your head it's loud, full of questions, worries, and that familiar tightness in your chest that shows up whenever someone you care about suddenly goes cold and shuts you out. In those moments, it doesn't feel like just a delay or they're probably busy. It feels personal. It feels like a verdict. Your mind rewinds everything you said, every text you sent, the last phone call, the last time you saw them. You start wondering if you came on too strong, if you were too honest, if you should have stayed quiet instead of speaking up. It's wild how a blank screen can make you feel smaller, unsure, like you somehow messed up even if you can't point to what you did wrong. Here's the part most people don't talk about. The silent treatment and stonewalling aren't only about the other person's behavior. They're about what that silence does to your nervous system. When someone withdraws affection, ignores your messages, or gives you one-word answers for days, it doesn't just sting your feelings. It hijacks your focus. You check your phone in the middle of meetings, you reread old conversations, you stop paying attention to work or school because part of you is stuck in that gap, waiting for a notification that will finally calm you down. And if nothing changes, this pattern quietly steals your time, your sleep, your ability to concentrate, and slowly, your sense of self-respect. Silent treatment also pushes you into some really uncomfortable choices. You either overfunction, sending follow-up messages, apologizing for things you don't even believe you did, and bending yourself in half just to restore peace. Or you shut down too, pretending you don't care, numbing out with scrolling, snacking, or work, while a part of you aches in the background. Neither option actually feels good. Both leave you feeling disconnected from yourself, because deep down you know you're reacting to somebody else's avoidance, not acting from your own values. Maybe you've been on both sides of this. Maybe there were times you didn't know what to say, so you went quiet and avoided the hard conversation. Or maybe you grew up around people who used silence to punish, so now whenever someone pulls away, your body treats it like an alarm. You might even feel ashamed of how intense your reaction is, like you're too much, when in reality your system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Either way, you deserve to understand what's actually happening inside you and how to respond in a way that protects your dignity instead of pushing you into chasing, begging, or over-explaining just to get a crumb of reassurance. In this lesson, you're going to get something very practical. You'll learn what this kind of silence does to your body and your mind, so you stop blaming yourself for reacting like it's an emergency. You'll learn how to create space between their behavior and your response, so you don't send that long, anxious paragraph you regret later. You'll see how a calmer, more grounded version of you can show up, even when the other person doesn't suddenly become perfect or emotionally mature. And you'll leave with simple, clear lines you can say and small actions you can take that help you stay steady, even when someone withdraws affection or attention. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If you want steady Stoic focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships every week, this is the channel for you. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. As you listen, you're not trying to diagnose the other person or fix them. You're learning how to manage what's inside your control, your attention, your breathing, your response time, your words, and your boundaries. The goal isn't to become cold or uncaring. The goal is to stay kind without abandoning yourself every time someone else decides to shut down. First, we're going to pull apart the belief that their silence automatically means you're unworthy, unwanted, or did something terrible. Next, we'll look at what silent treatment and stonewalling actually trigger in your nervous system, so you can see why your reactions feel so intense and stop assuming you're just too sensitive. Then we'll walk through clear ways to take back control of your attention and your schedule, so your entire day doesn't orbit around whether they text you back. After that, we'll build specific phrases and boundaries you can use when someone repeatedly goes cold on you, so you stop dancing around their moods and start standing on solid ground. Finally, we'll bring everything together in a real-life evening scenario, where you'll see how these tools can turn a familiar spiral into a calmer night, better sleep, and a lot more peace in your own mind. In a bit, we'll walk through that Friday night moment when you're staring at your screen, tempted to send a desperate, emotional message just to break the silence, and you'll see exactly how one small shift in your response keeps you from giving away your power again. You can't control whether someone goes silent, but you can control the moment where your mind tries to convince you that their silence means you're supposed to panic. The claim here is simple: your first job when someone pulls away is to steady your internal pace before you do anything else. Because if you don't, your nervous system will take over, and it will push you toward the same old reactions that leave you feeling embarrassed, drained, or ashamed later. When you skip this step, you end up reacting from fear instead of strength, and that fear usually makes everything worse. The stakes are high because if you never change this one moment, the very beginning, you will keep losing hours, sleep, confidence, and dignity every time someone shuts down emotionally. This works because your brain hates uncertainty. Silent treatment creates a gap, and your mind wants to fill that gap with a story fast. And without awareness, it fills it with the darkest possible version. They're mad at you, you ruined something, you're being punished, and you're being rejected. Your body reacts to that story as if it's an emergency. Your breathing gets shallow. Your thoughts speed up. You keep checking your phone like you're waiting on a life or death update. When Marcus writes about pausing before letting emotions dictate action, he's talking about this exact moment. There's a difference between feeling anxious because someone went cold and behaving as if you must fix it immediately to survive. The calmer version of you knows that your worth doesn't rise or fall based on someone else's sudden withdrawal. The calmer version of you responds with space instead of scrambling. So here's your one exact line for this section, a sentence you can say silently the moment you notice yourself reaching for your phone again. Their silence is information, not a command. Say it out loud if you can. It gives your mind something solid to hold so you don't get sucked into the spiral of guessing and second-guessing. It reminds you that you are allowed to pause. You are allowed to breathe. You are allowed to not react instantly. Imagine this in a real North American moment. You're at work, sitting at your desk after lunch, trying to finish a report that's due at the end of the day. Your phone lights up, and you think it's them, but it's just a calendar reminder. They haven't replied to your message from the night before, even though you saw them posting on social media earlier. The old reaction hits fast, your stomach drops, your mind starts scanning every sentence you sent, and before you know it, you're staring at your phone instead of finishing your report. You're tempted to send another message just to check in. Maybe a casual "Hey, everything okay?" Maybe a nervous apology for something you didn't actually do. You feel the urge rising like pressure behind your ribs. But then you remember the line. You say it under your breath: their silence is information, not a command. Instead of opening the chat thread again, you flip your phone face down, take one slow breath, and return to the document in front of you. The urge doesn't disappear instantly, but something shifts. You aren't obeying the panic. You aren't letting their withdrawal dictate your day. An hour passes, and you realize you've actually made progress on your work instead of spiraling. That one small line pulled you back into your life. Here's your tiny action for this section. For the next 24 hours, choose one person, the specific person whose silence usually hijacks your attention, and give yourself a defined reply window. Not for them. For you. Say to yourself, I check this thread at 10 a.m. and 8 p.m., not in between. That's it. 2 times a day. You're not blocking them. You're not punishing them. You're protecting your focus. And you'll be shocked at how much calmer your body feels when you're not checking every 10 minutes. This is measurable, doable, and completely within your control. Right now, take a slow breath with me, not anything dramatic, just one breath you actually feel. In, hold for a moment, and out. Notice how even that tiny pause interrupts the urge to chase. Your nervous system responds faster than your thoughts, which is why slowing your breath is not optional here. It's the physical signal that tells your body you are not in danger, even if someone else's silence feels threatening. If you can, say the line again quietly, their silence is information, not a command. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw unclench. Let your phone stay where it is. This one idea, steadying your internal pace before you speak or text, might feel too simple, but it's the foundation for everything that comes next. Without this pause, you'll sabotage your boundaries, over-explain your intentions, or accidentally reward someone's withdrawal by giving them more emotional labor than they're giving you. But when you create a moment of stillness first, even a tiny one, you wake up the more grounded version of you. The one who responds instead of reacts. The one who doesn't beg for clarity but creates clarity inside yourself. Hold on to that sentence, because when we get to that Friday night moment later, it becomes the one thing that keeps you from sending a painful message you can't take back. Most people think the hurt comes from the silence itself, but the real damage comes from the story your mind builds inside that silence. The claim for this section is straightforward. You need to separate what actually happened from what your thoughts rush to assume, because if you don't create that gap, the assumptions will run your emotions, your decisions, and your self-worth. When you don't learn this separation, silence turns into a trigger that can ruin your entire day. You start reacting to fears that aren't even real. And the stakes are simple. If you never confront this reflex, every cold pause from someone will pull you back into the same cycle of self-blame, overthinking, and emotional chaos, no matter how strong you think you've become. This works because your brain is wired to complete unfinished patterns. When something feels emotionally important to you, like a relationship, a growing connection, a friendship, a situationship, or even a coworker whose approval matters, your mind hates ambiguity. It wants closure, certainty, and predictability. But silent treatment gives you the opposite. It gives you blank space, and blank space feels unsafe to the survival part of your brain. So it fills it fast, and it usually fills it with the worst-case interpretation. They must be mad. You must have done something wrong. They must be losing interest. They must be disappointed in you. Even if none of that is true, it feels true because the emotion arrives before the logic. This is why Epictetus said we're disturbed not by events themselves but by the stories we tell about them. The calmer version of you knows the silence might mean 100 things that have nothing to do with you. The reactive version of you assumes it means one thing, rejection. If you don't slow down this pattern, your assumptions will run your reactions long before reality has a chance to show itself. So here's your exact line for this section. A sentence you keep in your pocket for the moments when your mind starts writing dramatic theories that feel like facts. I don't have enough information to make a story. Say it gently, not as a lecture, but as a grounding truth. It interrupts the emotional stampede. It tells your fear-driven brain that you're not treating guesses as reality. And most importantly, it stops you from acting on an interpretation you'll regret later. Picture this in an everyday North American moment. It's a Wednesday evening. You're sitting on your couch after work, scrolling through your phone, trying to unwind. Earlier in the day, you sent a thoughtful message to someone you're getting close to. Nothing demanding. Nothing heavy. Just something simple, hope your day's going well. Hours have passed. You've seen them post on social media. You've watched them like a couple of memes. You even noticed them online on the app where you first matched. But your message? Still open. Still unanswered. The old pattern starts fast. First comes the little sting, wow, not even a quick reply? Then the doubt, did I say something weird yesterday? Then the comparison thoughts, maybe they're talking to someone else. You start replaying last week's conversations, examining tone, analyzing emojis, trying to figure out if they were pulling away and you just didn't see it. Before long, your heart feels heavy, your stomach feels tight, and your mind is building a whole emotional movie that has you cast as the person being quietly abandoned. This is the moment you use the line. You whisper it to yourself, I don't have enough information to make a story. Maybe you say it again, slower this time. You put your phone down on the cushion beside you instead of holding it like a lifeline. The panic doesn't vanish immediately, it never does, but it loosens just enough for you to breathe again. Instead of sending the follow-up message you were composing in your head, you decide to step away from the conversation entirely for a little while. Maybe you start a show. Maybe you cook dinner. Maybe you take a shower. Whatever it is, you return to your own life instead of orbiting theirs. Without that line, you would have spiraled into assumptions. With it, you choose not to give a story more power than the facts deserve. Your tiny action for this section is extremely simple, but it builds the muscle you need. The next time someone goes silent or slow to respond, write down only what you factually know. Not what you fear. Not what you assume. Not what you predict. Just what is objectively true. Something like, message sent at 4:17 p.m. No reply yet. That's all. This tiny action interrupts the brain's habit of storytelling. It forces you back into reality instead of living in imagined rejection. And it strengthens the part of you that doesn't jump into self-blame at the first sign of someone else's withdrawal. Right now, take a slow, steady breath and imagine that you're holding a mental eraser. Picture yourself erasing all the imagined theories about why someone is quiet. The maybe they're tired of me, the maybe I annoyed them, the maybe they're losing interest, the maybe I shouldn't have said that, the maybe they're with someone else. Gently wipe those away. Not because the truth will always be pleasant, but because assuming the worst before you have evidence is self-punishment disguised as preparation. Say the line again, I don't have enough information to make a story. Let your shoulders relax as you say it. Let your breath deepen just a little. Feel the difference between reacting to fear and responding to facts. When you master this one separation, facts versus stories, you become harder to manipulate, harder to destabilize, and harder to pull into emotional confusion. Silent treatment loses some of its power because your mind stops sprinting ahead of reality. You're no longer treating a pause like a verdict. You're no longer handing your piece over to someone else's unpredictability. You start responding as the version of you who doesn't collapse under uncertainty. You start responding like someone who knows their worth is independent of another person's mood or avoidance. Keep this line close. You're going to need it later, especially in that Friday night moment when your mind tries to jump to conclusions that would push you to react in ways that only make the silence heavier. This time, you'll be ready. There's a moment in every silent treatment spiral where you stop thinking clearly and start trying to earn back someone's attention. You don't always notice it happening. It starts as a small impulse, a tiny tug that tells you, maybe if you explain yourself one more time, maybe if you soften your tone, maybe if you reach out just once more, they'll stop being distant. The claim for this section is this: when someone pulls away, your job is not to perform for their approval or chase after their attention. Your job is to stay aligned with your own dignity. Because the minute you start trying to win someone back during a period when they're withholding, you place your emotional stability in their hands. The stakes couldn't be higher. If you never break this reflex, every emotionally unavailable person you meet, partner, friend, sibling, co-worker, will be able to control your peace without saying a single word. This works because your nervous system interprets withdrawal as threat. When someone goes quiet, your brain treats it like a sign that you're losing connection, and connection is survival for the human brain. You start trying to repair something you didn't even break. You over-explain, over-apologize, or over-give in the hope that they'll stop the silence and restore that sense of safety. But the quieter they get, the louder your performance becomes, and you end up abandoning your own needs just to earn a response. When Seneca talked about not letting your peace depend on anything outside your control, he was pointing toward this exact trap. Silence becomes power only when you internalize the idea that you must chase it to feel okay again. But a calmer, more grounded version of you knows that affection earned through self-abandonment is never real safety. And attention won by shrinking yourself is never a victory. So here's your exact line for this section, the one you use the moment you feel that tug to prove yourself or fix everything. My dignity isn't negotiable, even in silence. Say it slowly. Let it land. You're not saying it to them, you're saying it to the part of you that tries to trade self-respect for temporary relief. You're saying it to the version of you that learned, somewhere along the way, that love or approval must be earned by overfunctioning. This line cuts through that belief. Picture a very real North American moment. It's a Saturday morning. You wake up earlier than you wanted, not because of an alarm, but because your brain has been in low-level panic all night. You check your phone before you even stretch. Still nothing. You see the message you sent last night, look thoughtful, calm, and respectful, and still no reply. You scroll up and notice how lopsided the chat looks. You've been carrying the emotional weight of the last several conversations. They respond when they want to. They disappear when they want to. And each time, you've tried to smooth things over so they wouldn't pull away again. The old you starts warming up. You begin drafting a new message in your head. Something gentle. Something reassuring. Maybe something that says, hey, if I said something wrong, let me know. I didn't mean to upset you. That's the performance. That's the version of you trying to earn clarity from a person who isn't offering even basic communication. You feel the familiar lump in your throat, the pressure in your chest, the urge to fix something you had no power to stop. This is the second you say the line, my dignity isn't negotiable, even in silence. You sit up. You breathe. You let the phone stay where it is. Suddenly, something inside you feels a little taller. You walk into the kitchen, start the coffee, and realize that for once, you didn't fold yourself just to get a breadcrumb of attention. The silence still hurts, but you didn't abandon yourself to escape the hurt. You showed yourself that you can handle discomfort without losing your self-respect. Here's your tiny action for this section. Choose one sentence you will not send, even when the silence feels unbearable. One sentence you will refuse to use as a bargaining chip for closeness. Something like, did I do something wrong, or are you mad at me, or just checking if we're okay? Pick one. And commit to not using it for the next 7 days. This is measurable. This is doable. And it breaks the underlying pattern of begging for reassurance from someone who isn't meeting you halfway. Right now, take a slow moment with me. Imagine the version of you who does not chase anyone. The version who values connection but doesn't collapse for it. The version who knows their worth without needing constant confirmation. Let your breath deepen, not as a fancy exercise, but as a signal to your body that you're not in danger. Say the line quietly, my dignity isn't negotiable, even in silence. Feel how it pulls your attention back into your own center, instead of leaving it scattered across someone else's absence. There's something else that happens when you hold onto your dignity during silent treatment. The dynamic changes. Not necessarily because the other person changes, but because you stop feeding the imbalance. When you don't perform, the silence no longer rewards their withdrawal. When you don't chase, they don't get to control the pace of the connection. And when you stand still instead of scrambling, you see the situation more clearly. Sometimes the person comes back and communicates better. Sometimes they reveal that emotional unavailability is their default pattern. Either way, you see the truth without bending yourself into knots. And here's the part that surprises most people. Holding dignity doesn't mean being cold or uncaring. It doesn't mean shutting the door prematurely. It means you participate in relationships from a place of steadiness instead of desperation. You don't overfunction. You don't collapse. You don't send messages drenched in anxiety. You act from clarity, not fear. Hold on to this line because later, when we reach that Friday night moment where you nearly give your power away, this is the sentence that stops you. This is the sentence that makes you breathe instead of break. There's a specific moment during silent treatment when the weight of the silence becomes heavier than the silence itself. It's the moment when you start to feel like you're the one who needs to fix the distance. Maybe you tell yourself you're just being mature, or that reaching out again will keep things from getting worse, or that giving them space means you're heartless. The claim for this section is this: You need to stop treating someone's withdrawal as a problem you must solve and start treating it as data about how they show up in relationships. When you fail to make that shift, you turn yourself into the emotional manager of the connection, and that role will drain you until nothing is left. The stakes are real. If you don't learn to interpret silence instead of repairing it, you will keep choosing people who reward your self-sacrifice instead of your self-respect. This works because your mind is conditioned to avoid discomfort. Silence is uncomfortable. Unpredictability is uncomfortable. The fear of losing someone feels uncomfortable. So you start doing anything, literally anything, to make that discomfort go away. You text again. You apologize prematurely. You ask if everything's okay. You offer reassurance even when you're the one who feels abandoned. You try to become smaller, more agreeable, less demanding, all so the silence will break. But what you're actually doing is training your nervous system to believe that someone else's lack of communication is your responsibility to fix. And when Marcus reminds himself to hold to what is mine, what he can control, this is the modern translation: someone else's withdrawal isn't yours to patch. The grounded version of you understands that the silence is revealing something. It might be their emotional capacity. It might be their communication habits. It might be their level of interest. But it is information, not a call to self-erasure. Here's your exact line for this section, the one you use when your chest tightens and the urge to fix everything rises. Their silence is their behavior, my response is mine. Say it cleanly. No edge. No bitterness. It separates the two roles. It pulls you back into your lane so you don't veer into emotional overfunctioning. It's one of the most powerful lines you can learn because it cuts through the illusion that fixing the connection is your job. Picture this in a realistic North American moment. It's late afternoon. You're heading out of the office, walking toward your car in the parking lot, bag over your shoulder, brain still buzzing with the end-of-day rush. Earlier, you sent a message to someone you've been dating, looking forward to tonight, let me know what time works. You weren't asking for much. Just clarity. Some basic adult communication. Hours passed. No answer. You saw they read it. You saw them active online. You even saw a story they posted with their friends. But your message? Ignored. The old you starts spinning. Maybe you should check in again. Maybe you should suggest a different time. Maybe you should apologize for asking for plans. Maybe you should pretend you don't care so they don't think you're clingy. You scroll through the thread, feeling that mix of frustration and shame, like you're suddenly the only one investing effort. Then something interrupts the spiral. You pause by your car door, hand on the handle, and you say the line out loud, their silence is their behavior, my response is mine. You feel your breath settle. You decide not to send the follow-up message. You decide not to push for clarity that they're not offering. You drive home, make your own dinner, and realize you've just taken back control of your energy instead of chasing someone who isn't showing up. They eventually text at 10 p.m. with a casual, sorry, busy day. But this time, the story doesn't hook you. You see the behavior clearly. You understand what it means. And you don't abandon yourself trying to decode it. Here's your tiny action for this section. Choose one interaction in your life where you usually take responsibility for the emotional tone. Identify one message you will not send unless the other person meets you halfway. Not forever, just for the next 24 hours. It might be, let me know your availability. It might be, did you get my message? It might be, just checking in. Whatever it is for you, choose it and refrain from sending it. This isn't withdrawal or revenge. It's a correction. It resets your role in the dynamic so you stop overworking for people who undercommunicate. Right now, take a slow breath with me. Imagine the silence you're dealing with as a cloud drifting in front of you, not a cliff you're falling off of. Let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw unclench. Say the line quietly, almost to yourself, their silence is their behavior, my response is mine. Feel the separation. Feel how it frees you to choose differently. Even your breath changes when you stop assuming someone else's emotional work is yours. There's something powerful that happens once you internalize this idea. You stop performing. You stop reflexively offering more than you're receiving. You stop trying to earn the affection of people who show you, with their actions, that they're not ready or willing to communicate with consistency. And when you stop doing that, the emotional power balance shifts. Not because you're manipulating anyone, but because you're no longer participating in a dynamic that drains you. People who rely on silence to create control often expect you to chase. When you don't, the dynamic becomes visible. Either they step up and communicate, or they drift away. Either way, you win clarity without sacrificing yourself. And clarity is worth infinitely more than temporary relief bought by begging for someone's attention. This one line will matter later. When we get to that Friday night moment, you'll see how using it protects you from sending a message that would trap you back in the old cycle. You won't be walking towards someone who is walking away. You'll be standing in your own life, choosing your responses instead of reacting to their void. There's a pattern that plays out in almost every relationship where silent treatment or stonewalling starts to appear. You begin waiting. Waiting for the reply. Waiting for the tone to soften. Waiting for them to come back to emotional availability. Waiting for the tension to break so you can feel normal again. The claim for this section is this: you need to stop putting your life on pause while you wait for someone else to regulate themselves. The more you freeze your own routines, habits, and responsibilities, the more power the silence gains over you. And the stakes are serious because every hour you spend waiting is an hour taken from your goals, your peace, your work, your friendships, and the version of yourself you're trying to become. This works because the human brain equates waiting with hope. When someone pulls away, you start modifying your behavior around the idea that they will eventually return to you. You hold back from making other plans. You slow your day down so you don't miss their message. You stop starting anything meaningful because part of you is bracing for a notification that might relieve the discomfort. Over time, the waiting becomes a habit, and the habit becomes a mindset that tells you your life can't move until they do. But a calmer, stoic-aligned version of you understands something else. Movement is how you stabilize your system. You don't wait your way out of emotional anxiety, you act your way out. You continue your life not to punish them, but to keep your emotional center intact. Here's your exact line for this section, the one you'll use when you notice yourself hovering around your phone or slowing down your whole evening because someone hasn't replied. My life keeps moving, even when someone else pauses. Say it with a steady tone. Not petty. Not harsh. Just factual. It's a reminder that your schedule, your energy, and your intentions aren't supposed to freeze just because someone has disappeared behind their own wall. Imagine this in a real North American moment. It's a Thursday night. You get home around 6, drop your work bag on the chair, kick off your shoes, and think about making dinner. You sent a message earlier that afternoon, want to finalize plans for Saturday? You thought it was a simple question. Hours pass. Nothing. You heat up leftovers, but you're not really hungry because your stomach has been tight all evening. You wander around your apartment like you're half in your life and half in that conversation thread. You sit on the couch and scroll your phone with no real purpose. You think about starting a show, but you can't focus. You think about washing dishes, but you don't start. Everything feels suspended because you're waiting for them to break the silence so you can feel okay again. This is where the old reaction takes over. You look at your phone every 8 minutes. You replay the conversation from last night. You start drafting a gentle message in your mind to nudge the conversation forward. You might even tell yourself you're not going to send it, even though you know you probably will. Then you catch yourself. You pause. You breathe and say the line quietly, my life keeps moving, even when someone else pauses. You stand up. You walk to the kitchen. You turn on the faucet and wash the dishes that have been sitting there. You put on music. You take a warm shower. You stretch your body a little. You let your mind return to the reality of your evening instead of the imagined scenarios in your head. Suddenly you realize something powerful. The silence still exists, but it's not running your night anymore. Your tiny action for this section is deceptively simple. Choose one task, one concrete, physical, real-world task, that you will begin the moment you notice yourself waiting. It could be folding laundry. It could be wiping the counter. It could be stepping outside for a 5-minute walk. It could be organizing a drawer. It doesn't matter what the task is. What matters is that it pulls your body forward so your mind doesn't freeze in place. This is how you reclaim momentum. You don't do it with willpower. You do it with movement. Right now, take a breath with me. Not a dramatic one. Just a slow, grounding inhale and a softer exhale. Picture the part of you that stops living when someone stops responding. Picture how small and tense that version of you feels. Now picture the version of you who keeps moving, who keeps breathing, who keeps participating in their own day. Say the line once, quietly, my life keeps moving, even when someone else pauses. Feel the difference in your body. The fear-driven version of you contracts. The grounded version expands. There's something interesting that happens when you practice this. The silence stops feeling like a crisis and starts feeling like information. When you keep moving, you start seeing patterns more clearly instead of getting blurred by your own anxiety. You might notice how often they withdraw. You might notice how much effort you're putting into a dynamic that isn't mutual. You might realize you've built your schedule around their unpredictability without even meaning to. You start observing instead of absorbing. And the more you move inside your own life, the more you learn that waiting is not your personality, it is just a habit. A habit built from fear, attachment, or early experiences where connection felt fragile. When you break the habit, you don't become cold. You become stable. You stop negotiating your energy around someone else's inconsistency. You stop rearranging your priorities every time they create distance. And you stop believing that your life has to pause until someone becomes ready to show up. This shift doesn't just change how you respond to silence, it changes your relationship to your time. Suddenly your evening belongs to you again. Your thoughts belong to you again. Your self-worth belongs to you again. You don't hand it away for free to someone whose communication patterns are unclear or unpredictable. You take back ownership of the hours that make up your actual life. Hold on to this line. It will matter later. When we reach that Friday night moment, the moment where you almost cancel your own plans just to stay available for someone who isn't communicating, you will see how one simple decision to keep moving prevents you from giving up another night of your life to someone else's emotional pause. There's always a point in the silent treatment cycle where you stop being confused and start feeling angry. It might not be explosive anger. Sometimes it's quiet, tired, almost numb anger, the kind that shows up after you've tried patience, understanding, and giving space, only to be met with the same wall. The claim for this section is this: you need to learn how to work with that anger without letting it push you into reactions that make the situation worse or compromise your self-respect. When you don't manage this part well, anger becomes a trap. You fire off messages you regret, you shut down too hard, you lash out, or you say things that don't reflect who you actually want to be. And the stakes are big because unmanaged anger during silent treatment often leads to the kind of emotional damage that's much harder to repair than the silence itself. This works because anger is a secondary emotion. Beneath it is sadness, fear, disappointment, or the feeling of being devalued. When someone stonewalls you or gives you the silent treatment, your nervous system first feels the hurt. But if the hurt stays unaddressed for too long, it transforms into anger, because anger feels stronger than vulnerability. It feels like power. It feels like motion. But if you act on that anger without slowing it down, you almost always create outcomes that lead to more silence, more distance, and more emotional exhaustion. And when Epictetus talks about not letting someone else's actions disturb your inner state, he isn't saying don't feel angry. He's saying feel it without letting it dictate your behavior. The calmer version of you knows anger is information, not instruction. It's a signal to look inward, not a command to strike outward. Here's your exact line for this section: I can feel this anger without letting it drive the moment. Say it slowly so your system hears it. You're not rejecting your anger. You're containing it. You're giving it space to exist without giving it your hands or your thumbs on the screen. This line gives you a boundary with yourself, which is often the hardest boundary to build. Now imagine this in a real North American moment. It's Sunday evening. You've had a long week. You've been dealing with work stress, bills, errands, and all the normal background noise of adult life. You were looking forward to spending time with someone who matters to you, a plan you both talked about earlier in the week. But as the day went on, the silence continued. No update. No confirmation. No cancellation. Just nothing. And as the hours pass, that nothing becomes disrespectful. It feels like they don't value your time. It feels like they don't care about the effort you put into planning. It feels like they're treating the connection casually while you're treating it seriously. Your old reaction builds inside you. First the hurt. Then the confusion. Then the irritation. Then the anger. You start drafting a message in your notes app. Something sharp. Something like, you know what? Forget it. I'm tired of this. Or maybe, if you can't communicate, I'm done. You rehearse the lines in your head. You imagine finally saying the thing you've been holding in. And in one version of the story, it feels satisfying. But then you say the line, I can feel this anger without letting it drive the moment. You take your hands off the keyboard. You put your phone down. You sit back on the couch and breathe. The anger doesn't vanish, but it softens. It becomes less like a weapon and more like a signal. You notice something important. You don't actually want to send a hostile message. You want to be respected. You want clarity. You want someone who communicates like an adult. And blowing up won't create any of that. Instead of sending the message, you choose a different response. You order your dinner. You watch a show. You reclaim your evening. Later, when they finally send a half-hearted sorry, today got hectic, you're not emotionally raw. You're clear-eyed. You're able to respond from steadiness instead of from the heat of the moment. The connection feels different, not because they changed, but because you did. Here's your tiny action for this section. The next time you feel that spark of anger in the silence, delay your reply by 1 hour. Not as a punishment to them, but as a gift to yourself. 1 hour gives your physical body time to come down from the emotional spike. 1 hour gives your mind time to filter what's true, what's fear, and what's frustration. 1 hour protects your future self from repairing the damage caused by a message sent too fast. Right now, take a slow breath with me. Feel your ribcage expand. Feel it soften as you exhale. Anger tends to sit in your shoulders and jaw, so let both relax for a moment. Say the line either out loud or silently, I can feel this anger without letting it drive the moment. Notice the shift. Notice how the anger becomes a feeling you're observing instead of a force that's controlling you. This is you reclaiming emotional authority. When you learn to hold anger without acting out of it, you gain something rare. You gain clarity. Because it's never just the silence, they're teaching you something with their behavior. And when you're not blinded by anger, you see what's actually happening. You see the inconsistency. You see the lack of reciprocity. You see the places where you've been working too hard to keep the connection alive. And you see the difference between someone who communicates imperfectly and someone who uses silence as avoidance or control. This skill also protects you from misinterpreting your own emotional intensity. Sometimes silence does hurt. Sometimes it does trigger something old inside you. Sometimes it does bring up fears from experiences you'd rather forget. But when you stay grounded through the anger, you respond in a way that honors both the present moment and the person you're becoming. And this is where the real transformation begins. Because once you learn to sit with anger without reacting, you stop being destabilized by other people's shutdowns. You stop believing you have to fix anything in the heat of emotion. You stop giving away your power through impulsive messages. You start operating from principle instead of panic. Keep this line close. You're going to need it when we enter that Friday night moment soon, the moment where anger combines with hurt and tempts you to send a message that would undo all the progress you've made. This time, you'll feel the heat rising, but you won't let it drive the moment. There's a point in every silent treatment pattern where you face the deeper fear underneath everything, the fear that if you set a boundary, you'll lose the person. This fear is what keeps you quiet when you want to speak up, keeps you available when you feel neglected, and keeps you tolerating behavior that drains you because you're scared of what happens if you finally draw a line. The claim for this section is this: you need a simple, steady boundary that protects your emotional stability without escalating the situation or abandoning your values. If you never build this boundary, you end up accepting any version of connection offered to you, even if it runs you into exhaustion. The stakes are big because without a boundary, silent treatment becomes a cycle instead of a moment, something you learn to endure rather than something you choose not to participate in. This works because boundaries are not confrontational by nature. They are clarifying. They tell the other person what you will and won't engage with, not because you want to control them, but because you want to protect your own mental clarity. Silent treatment is especially destructive because it creates confusion, an in-between space where you don't know if you should reach out, retreat, give space, push forward, or assume the worst. The boundary clears the fog. It gives you a lane to walk in. It reduces overthinking because you already know the rule you're following. And the calmer version of you understands that boundaries are not about forcing better communication, they're about preventing you from collapsing into someone else's absence. Your exact line for this section is simple and extremely effective: I'm available for conversations, not for disappearing acts. You don't have to say it out loud to the other person right away. You say it to yourself first, so you know the standard you're holding. This line sets the tone for how you want to engage. It reminds you that connection requires communication. It reminds you that silence without context is not something you're obligated to tolerate. And more importantly, it reminds you that you're not here to audition for someone's attention. Imagine this in a real North American moment. It's midweek. You've had a long day at work. You finally sit down with dinner and decide to text the person you've been talking to, "Hey, want to catch up later?" You don't need a fast reply. You don't need a 40-message conversation. You're just extending normal, healthy communication. They open the message. You see the red notification. Then silence. 20 minutes. 2 hours. 5 hours. The night ends. Nothing. You wake up in the morning, check again, and see they were active on social media around midnight. Still nothing. The old version of you goes into analysis mode. Maybe they're losing interest. Maybe you shouldn't have said anything. Maybe you need to lighten your tone. Maybe you're too available. Maybe you're expecting too much. You start rehearsing ways to reach out again, ways to soften yourself, ways to maintain connection even while being treated like an optional afterthought. But now you have a boundary. You take a slow breath and quietly say, "I'm available for conversations, not for disappearing acts." The shift is subtle but powerful. You stop searching for excuses for their behavior. You stop shrinking. You stop bending your availability around uncertainty. Instead of drafting a second message, you take a shower, get dressed, make breakfast, and go on with your day. When they eventually send a short, "Hey, sorry, yesterday got crazy," you don't feel the same desperation to restore closeness. You feel clear-eyed. You feel grounded. You respond when you feel ready, not immediately and not from panic. Your tiny action for this section is extremely practical. Define your communication threshold. Choose the amount of time after which silence becomes information, not rejection, not an emergency, just information. For some people it's 6 hours. For some it's 12. For some it's a full day. Whatever your number is, choose it intentionally. And once that threshold is passed, you shift your mindset from "maybe something changed" to "this is how they handle connection." You don't confront them angrily. You don't accuse them. You don't make assumptions. You simply shift from investment to observation. This action lets you participate in communication without sacrificing your self-respect. Right now, take a slow breath and picture the version of you who confidently maintains this boundary. Picture yourself standing, not aggressively, not defensively, but steadily. Picture the silence happening, and instead of spiraling, you remind yourself, I'm available for conversations, not for disappearing acts. Feel how different that is from waiting, wondering, or chasing. Feel how it grounds your body instead of sending your nervous system into panic. This is the moment where many people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are punishments. They think boundaries are ultimatums. They think boundaries are dramatic confrontations. But real boundaries are quiet. They're calm. They're consistent. They're not about controlling the other person, they're about controlling your engagement. A boundary says, this is how I show up. If you can meet me here, great. If not, I'm still okay. It frees you from emotional dependency on someone else's fluctuations. As you hold this boundary, something meaningful starts to happen. You stop negotiating for the bare minimum. You stop trying to prove your worth through patience. You stop tolerating communication patterns that keep you in emotional limbo. And you stop believing that love or attention should feel like a puzzle you're responsible for solving. Instead, you begin to trust that healthy connection doesn't require you to tolerate confusion. It doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't require you to chase. It invites you into clarity because the other person actually wants to be there. And when someone can't meet that standard, the boundary helps you see it sooner without dramatizing the situation. You don't need a fight. You don't need a speech. You don't need a long, emotional explanation about how their silence made you feel. You simply adjust your involvement. The relationship either strengthens because the other person steps up, or it naturally fades because the mismatch becomes obvious. Either result is clarity, or clarity is relief disguised as loss. Hold onto this line closely because soon, in that Friday night moment we've been building toward, you will face a point where your instincts push you to break your own boundary. That's the moment when this exact sentence becomes the thing that keeps you from slipping back into old patterns. You'll feel the silence pressing against you, you'll feel the fear rising, and you'll feel the urge to reach out just to ease the discomfort. But this time, you'll breathe, steady yourself, and remember, I'm available for conversations, not for disappearing acts. It's finally Friday night. The week has been long, heavy, full of tiny frustrations, deadlines, and the usual stack of responsibilities. You've been looking forward to tonight, not because anything huge was planned, but because you thought you and this person might talk, maybe spend time together, and maybe just reconnect after a quiet couple of days. That hope sat in the back of your mind all week like a small light. But as you walk into your apartment and drop your keys on the counter, that light flickers. You unlock your phone and see what you saw all day: silence. Message delivered. Message opened. No reply. The familiar panic rises. Not all at once, slowly, like water creeping up your ankles. You start replaying everything you said this week. You start checking their social activity, noticing they were online just 10 minutes ago. You start feeling that tightness in your chest, the one that makes the silence feel personal, like a verdict. And then, almost on autopilot, you start drafting a long message. The emotional paragraph. The one you've sent versions of in the past. The one that always comes from hurt, from fear, from the belief that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, they'll finally respond with the warmth you want. This is the open loop from earlier, the exact moment we've been building toward. The moment where the silence grabs you the hardest and your instinct is to fix it with words. You stare at the message you're composing, thumb hovering over the send button. The old version of you is right there, alive, ready to take over. But then something interrupts the spiral. Something you've been practicing all your lessons. You hear the line from section 2, their silence is information, not a command. You lower your phone just a little. Your breath deepens by half an inch. The emotional urgency cracks slightly. Then comes the line from section 3, I don't have enough information to make a story. The fear-driven narrative, the one where they're losing interest or punishing you or pulling away, loses a little of its force. You look at your phone again, but this time you're not interpreting the silence as an attack. You're just observing it. You stand there in your kitchen, holding your phone, and you feel the anger from Section 7 rising behind your ribs. The heat of it. The sense of insult. The temptation to snap back with something sharp. But now you remember the line, "I can feel this anger," without letting it drive the moment. You say it once under your breath. Your jaw relaxes. Your shoulders drop. The anger is still there, but it's no longer steering your thumbs. You put the phone down on the counter. Not dramatically. Just intentionally. And you breathe, one slow inhale, one slow exhale, the kind we practiced earlier. Your body starts loosening its grip on the panic. Now you move into Section 6 practice without even realizing it. You keep your life moving. You open the fridge. You decide what to make for dinner. You turn on music. Every small action reminds your nervous system that your life continues, even when someone else pauses. There's something freeing in that. 20 minutes later, while chopping vegetables, you feel the familiar pull to check your phone again. But instead of walking over impulsively, you whisper the boundary from Section 8, "I'm available for conversations, not for disappearing acts." You say it calmly, like a quiet promise to yourself. And suddenly, the idea of sending that long message feels wrong, too heavy, too desperate, too self-abandoning. It doesn't match the person you want to be. You decide to wash your hands before checking your phone. A small act of delay. A reclaiming of pace. When you finally pick it up, there's still no reply. But the panic is gone. The meaning you used to attach to the silence isn't gripping you anymore. You see the behavior clearly now. You see what it tells you, and what it doesn't. An hour passes. You eat dinner, watch a show, and actually enjoy parts of your night. For the first time in a long time, the silence isn't controlling the mood of your entire evening. You've shifted from reacting to responding. From spiraling to observing. From chasing to choosing. Later that night, around 10:43 p.m., a message finally came in, "Hey, sorry, today got crazy." What's up? The old you would have felt instant relief, instant validation, and instant readiness to reconnect. The old you would have replied immediately, pretending the emotional roller coaster of the day didn't happen. But tonight, you don't answer right away. Not out of pettiness, out of clarity. You give yourself space. You breathe. You check in with how you actually feel. You remind yourself of the tiny action from Section 7 and the separation from Section 5. Their silence is their behavior, my response is mine. You place the phone face down again. You finish your show. You let your night belong to you. The shift is quiet, subtle, and almost unremarkable from the outside. But inside, it's massive. You didn't chase. You didn't spiral. You didn't self-abandon. You didn't send the paragraph you would have regretted. You stayed with yourself. You stayed aligned with your values. You held your dignity through the silence. And when you finally choose to reply tomorrow, it will be from a place of calm, not fear. From clarity, not desperation. From strength, not emotional reflex. This is what the work looks like in real life. Not dramatic transformations. Just steady ownership of your attention, your breath, your boundaries, and your self-respect, moment by moment, pause by pause, silence by silence. When the Friday night test arrived, you didn't collapse. You showed up as the version of you you've been building in every section leading up to this any. At the heart of everything we've worked through today is a simple lesson. You can't control whether someone goes silent, but you can control whether their silence pulls you out of yourself. This entire episode has been about shifting from reacting to responding, from panic to presence, from chasing someone who withdraws to choosing your own internal steadiness. The real difference isn't between silence and communication, it's between losing yourself in the gap and standing grounded while the gap appears. You learned the power of responding to what's real instead of what your fears imagine, and you practiced ways to hold your dignity through the silence instead of treating someone else's behavior as a command. First, we looked at the moment where silent treatment hits your nervous system and you start assuming the worst about yourself, and we break the belief that their silence automatically means something is wrong with you. Then we walk through how your mind fills uncertainty with stories and how telling yourself you don't have enough information changes your whole emotional landscape. Next, we explored the instinct to perform or over-explain when someone withdraws and how holding your dignity keeps you from collapsing into the role of emotional fixer. After that, you learned how to separate their behavior from your response so you stop taking responsibility for someone else's communication patterns. Then we moved into the importance of momentum and why you can't freeze your life just because someone else pauses. Following that, you practiced holding anger without letting it drive your next move, honoring the feeling without acting impulsively. Next, we built the boundary that clarifies how you want to engage, being available for conversations, not disappearing acts. Finally, you watched all of it come together in that Friday night moment where you almost slipped back into old habits but instead reclaimed your evening, your breath, your voice, and your sense of self. Here are 3 do-today steps that anchor all of this work. Today, choose one conversation thread that makes you anxious and set a reply window for yourself so you check it only twice, not constantly. Today, give yourself 1 hour of delay before replying to any emotionally loaded message so your body has time to settle. Today, define the amount of silence that becomes information for you, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24, and use that number to create clarity instead of confusion. If this resonated, the next lesson you'll want to watch is the one on emotional whiplash in relationships, where we go deeper into the patterns that make someone warm one day and cold the next, and how you stay steady in the swing instead of becoming controlled by it. If you want a whole library of Stoic Focus lessons on emotional control, boundaries, and relationships, this is what we do here every week. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.